Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this radio, audio, no pictures. Listen to this video in your truck or you're driving along in your car live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a problem all across the Western world, from Ireland to the United States to Australia, Canada, and elsewhere, is the way real estate prices of residential dwellings, as distinct from, say, office space, residential dwellings, just keeps on and on and on going up. Now, if it goes down, there's a comment. One city in Australia a couple of months back, it went down, and the average price went down by 0.1%. Something like, wow, that's in free fall. So how is it possible that prices go up, house prices go up, while there is fewer and fewer people who can afford the payments? So if it was a supply and demand thing, then we would see prices falling, because the average wage, or even the top 1 or 2% of wage, they're not enough anymore to pay a mortgage on an average dwelling. So let's sort of look at this and try and work out what's going on here. Now, according to the latest, and I've been making a point of keeping statistics now for over a year so I can follow, and I often find huge errors in the propaganda that gets put through on the media. But just looking at the bigger and wider picture here of residential real estate sales, if you look at, say, Sydney, and Sydney's the most expensive city, but nonetheless, the average price of a dwelling. Now, the average includes, by the way, houses, standalone houses, and apartments. Once you go to standalone properties, then you're in another league again. Once you go to the tree-lined street with the nice schools, down the road around the corner, then you're in yet another league again. So look, what we're looking at is average again, which is average of all residential dwellings, including apartments. Now, if we take that average, which is indicative rather than something to, absolutely run with, if we take that average, then look at the minimum required deposit of, depending on where you go, it's 15%, and the amount you have to borrow. You need to be in the top. You need to have about 4.5, 4.6, 4.7 times the average wage to afford. Now, this is just to afford the payments on the property, by the way. This is before you eat or you run a motor vehicle, or you buy your clothes and pay your electricity bill and so on. So this is or now if you look at the cost of putting food and all the other stuff, you're going to around 5.5 times the average wage. Now, again, you've got no children or dependents or anything, and even at that, you would be living paycheck to paycheck if you had got sick. And they're 5.5 times the average wage. If you got sick or you couldn't work or that, or your medical benefits health plan didn't cover your sickness, you'd be fucked. But anyway, that's what, so 5.5 times. Let's suppose you're sharing that with somebody else. So, like your partner, for example. So both of you are there. Now, you're still living hand to mouth at this point. So you'd be looking at around 2.3, 2.4 times. So each of you would need to have approximately 2.5 times the average wage. So let's just look at the demographic that could afford. Now, remember, this is the average, and it assumes you've got your deposit and you're living paycheck to paycheck, which I don't think anybody would want. But so if you're looking at just one income, then you're looking at about one person in, say, every 130 to every 140 wage and income salary earners up. So you're looking at less than 1%. Yeah. So then if you look at, say, the two incomes, like 2.5 times the average wage, then you're around 15%, give or take, so of the population. Now, if you then have children in on the mix, then you need yet more money again. So you're assuming two incomes, you're down into 5% of the population, and so on. So you're looking, or this is the working population. So you're looking at a very small pool of people that can afford it. Now this is the average. Now you want to go to the tree-lined street, so with the good schools and your polite, well-behaved neighbours, all that sort of stuff. There's no crime in the area. You want to go to that, then you're looking at, say, 1 in every 200 to 220 people could afford that. And again, they'd be living, it would be tight on that. If you want to look at something that could be easily afforded, then you'd be looking at around 1 in 300 income earners. So really the amount of people, local people that can play in the real estate market, particularly at the upper end or even above the average. And again, if you look at freestanding houses, if you take apartments out of the loop and you go into freestanding houses, then you're even going higher up the scale again, 6 times the average wage and so on, just to play at entry level stuff. Now, this means there's a tinier number of people who can afford to buy the real estate. Now, if we look at classic supply and demand as taught in the business schools, or was, I don't know if it is today, it was when I went to school, but this idea of supply and demand. So given the amount of people that can afford to buy property and the amount of new property that comes onto the market, I'll use the word market sort of generically. I don't think real estate is a market at the moment. It's fixed and rigged and controlled. So anyway, so you look at that. So there is far more supply coming into the market than there is buyers capable of buying that product. So that brings us to the question of who's buying it. It's certainly not people here. There's a very small number of people. Now, we've either got a very, very small number of people buying up vast swathes of property, or we've got buyers coming from outside the economy to buy. It's one or the other or both. So now I noticed something in one Australian city where the amount of time that the property was for sale, the amount of time increased quite considerably. So it went from 18.5 weeks to 32.5 weeks. So the property was taking much longer to clear, and the local economy was in a bit of trouble there. So businesses closing, things like that. But somehow the property prices kept going up. In fact, going up quite dramatically. So there's less money moving around. The properties are taking longer to clear, and yet the properties are going up quite substantially. That doesn't happen. That's an impossible dynamic in the real world. So again, money is coming from outside somewhere into this. Now, as I look at the properties for sale, around this area, and this is not this is not the most expensive postcodes in Australia, for goodness sakes. When I look at the property around here for sale, and I purposefully go to some of the viewings and the sales or the auctions in the event it's an auction, and I can't recall, since I've been looking, I can't recall a time when an Anglo-Saxon, a local white person talking with an Australian accent, bought the property. It's always been brown. So Chinese or Indian. Those are the buyers. A couple of Arabic-looking folks, I suppose, but typically it's Chinese, Indian. That's it. They're the ones that come to view it, and they're not coming along in cheap cars. We're talking top of the range, Porsches, Mercs, and so on. So they're cash. They look very wealthy. They talk with Beijing accents. I can't talk any of the Indian dialects, but passable in Mandarin. So they're from the elites. They strut around like they own the fucking place. So they're clearly people who've very well connected to the party machine, the Communist Party machine back in China, and they've got shitloads of money to spend to launder. And effectively, it's money laundering. And there's no real restriction from doing it. Technically, there is, but they can effortlessly use local nominees to own the property on their behalf, which is rampant, by the way, in Australia. So this is where you have illiterate peasant cleaners that own, $10 million worth, got a $10 million property portfolio, and somehow no one seems to notice or ask questions, or why doesn't that get investigated? They have no problem going after truckers that demonstrate, but they can't do anything about illiterate cleaners on $30,000 a year have $10 million property portfolios. So anyway, it's clearly money coming from outside and not from the local economy. So the economy doesn't reflect the supply and demand of stock, in this case residential property, to people's capacity to pay. That's gone out the window a long time ago. And when I was we had some work in the city and we were renting an apartment nearby, I used to go to the auctions, because it mostly was auctions at the time, property auctions around, and they were just buying gangs of Chinese that would go from auction to auction, just buy each one, didn't care what they paid. I mean, they were money laundering. It wasn't like they had a 9-to-5 job and they had to balance the pennies or something. They didn't. They were just mass money laundering. And this one, property after property after property, and you could just follow them around, and it was like a vacuum cleaner. They were just vacuuming up every property in the neighbourhood. And of course, property prices skyrocket when you've got that sort of activity going on. But it wouldn't happen in the event there was just local buyers. So the property prices are no reflection at all of local buying. And as the property prices continue to advance much faster than incomes, then the amount of local people who can participate in the property market declines even further. Now, if you look at it on a trajectory basis, where you look at the increase in incomes and the increase of property prices, assuming current trends continue, which they may not, then within the next 15 years, there'll be something like 1 in 1,000 local working Australians will be able to afford to buy property, certainly anything above the average. And that's an outrage. Yet our government, our media, no one talks about it. No one's doing anything about it, and it seems to be it's how things are. Now, part of this is because the political class in the West, all across the West, now derive, or most of them at least, now derive the principal portion of their total income from property speculation. So they're very tightly in bed with the big financial end of town to get them into nice cozy property deals, and then to sell it to rich Chinese investors who pay well over the card, so the politician makes windfall profits. So that's going on, and politicians again making the bulk of their income from real estate speculation and dabbling in real estate, but they're not taking any fucking risks. They're shoehorned into excellent deals, and again, buyers that pay well over the card. Nobody can lose when you're playing in that game. So the political class really have no incentive to, it's at the point where I'd rather politicians were paid 5 times what they're currently paid, if they were focused on actually running the country for the benefit of the domestic population. But they're not, and I don't see that they will be anytime soon. So, residential real estate prices are a reflection of our political class being bought and sold by big international finance. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.